Etta James, born Jamesetta Hawkins, on January 25, 1938, in Los Angeles, California, lived a life as stirring and unpredictable as the music she would eventually bring into the world. The circumstances of her birth alone hinted at a dramatic path. Her mother was only 14, and Etta never knew her father with certainty. She believed he might have been the famed pool hustler Minnesota Fats, a notion that, whether true or not, fueled countless questions about her background. Surrounded by a swirl of relatives and family friends who raised her, Etta had an unconventional childhood in which music would ultimately serve as both anchor and escape. As she discovered her own voice, powerful, emotional, and unmistakably raw, the trajectory of American rhythm and blues was about to gain one of its most iconic performers. Yet beyond the spotlight of musical triumph, Etta's life was a series of tumultuous ebbs and flows, fueled by personal struggles, health challenges, and a relentless drive to sing her truth no matter the cost. She was called Jamesetta at birth, but the world would soon know her as Etta James, a name that came into frequent usage after she began her recording career in the 1950s. Before that, she grew up largely under the care of her grandparents, especially during her earliest years when her mother was often absent. It was with these grandparents that she began attending a local Baptist church, a place where music took on profound significance. The church choir, with its uplifting choruses and deep spiritual undercurrents, nurtured Etta's innate ability to sing with dramatic flair. Even at a young age, her voice astounded those around her. She stood out as a soloist, appearing on local radio broadcasts that showcased her precocious vocal skills. People from the neighborhood and beyond were captivated by the small girl who could unleash such power and soul with seemingly little effort. When Etta was 12, her life took a sudden turn with the passing of the foster mother she had been closest to. Not long after, she moved to San Francisco to live with her birth mother. The city brought with it both opportunity and hazard, especially for a child left largely unsupervised. While Etta dived deeper into music, forming a trio called the Creolettes, with two friends, she also fell into juvenile delinquency, as she later candidly admitted. San Francisco in the early 1950s was a lively place with a diverse musical scene that included R&B clubs, jazz lounges, and the unmistakable influence of the West Coast blues. But for a teenager with minimal guidance, it could also be a playground of vice. She navigated that world with the same intensity she brought to singing, unstoppable, heedless of risk, and always searching for the next thrill. Etta's group, the Creolettes, eventually caught the ear of famed band leader Johnny Otis, himself a key figure in the development of early rock and roll and R&B. In hearing their track Roll With Me Henry, an answer song to Hank Ballard's then infamous Work With Me Annie, Otis recognized a rough, gutsy talent that demanded exposure. He helped them sign with Modern Records, and it was Otis who suggested they rename both the group and the track. The Creolettes became the Peaches, and Roll With Me Henry became the Wallflower. This version soared on the R&B charts in 1955 despite being overshadowed by Georgia Gibbs's cover, which crossed over to mainstream pop audiences. At the time, many black performers saw their creations re-recorded and smoothed out by white artists who often reaped greater commercial rewards. This injustice pained Etta, intensifying an already simmering rage at the inequalities of the era. Yet the Wallflower introduced her to a national audience, prompting the music business to pay attention to a young singer whose passion was palpable in every note. Not long after scoring a second R&B hit called Good Rockin' Daddy, the Peaches disbanded. Etta James, stepping away from the group format, launched a solo career that would define her as one of the era's commanding voices. Her initial years as a solo artist were not smooth sailing. She released singles on modern records, but none reached the level of commercial success necessary to pull her out of small clubs and local tours. These were the days when Etta got her road experience, traveling dusty byways from one gig to another, sometimes in caravans with other R&B acts, sometimes with minimal backing, always forging her craft on stage night after night. Stories abound of her unstoppable spirit. She was known to push through colds, exhaustion, and bad pay to deliver an electrifying performance. Although her record struggled to gain traction, her reputation for gritty, unvarnished soul was taking shape. In 1960, Leonard Chess, co-founder of Chicago's Chess Records, heard the potential in Etta's vocals and offered her a record deal. Chess Records and its subsidiary labels, Argo and Checker, were a powerhouse in the blues and R&B world, home to legends like Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf, as well as innovators like Chuck Berry. Etta's arrival meant a female voice of extraordinary presence would join the label's storied roster. Working with producers Ralph Bass and Harvey Fuqua, she fused R&B's raw emotional energy with the polish of jazz arrangements. Out of these sessions came hits such as All I Could Do Was Cry, My Dearest Darling, and Trust in Me. Her career now soared, and the Chess label recognized her wide appeal. She was equally comfortable delivering a rollicking number or pouring heartbreak into a gentle ballad. Her unique versatility would become her signature, enabling her to maintain an audience even as pop music trends shifted. Behind the scenes, however, Etta was dealing with the demons that would haunt her for decades. She first tried drugs as a teenager, as she later confessed, and by the time she was 21, she was already mired in heroin addiction. The 1960s, so often mythologized as a time of youthful rebellion and creative experimentation, for Etta became an endless juggling act. She tried to maintain her career momentum while searching for ways to feed her escalating habit. Chess Records, in turn, was not always supportive in the ways she needed. As a female R&B artist, she had to fight for her royalties, endure the complexities of the label system, and face interpersonal conflicts. Her personal life, too, was tumultuous. She fell into abusive relationships, a pattern that mirrored her battles with addiction. Each step forward in her career was matched by new difficulties in her private sphere. She would later speak candidly about this period, describing how the stage sometimes felt like the only place she could unleash her anguish, while simultaneously finding a fleeting sense of belonging. By the mid-1960s, her chart success began to wane. The British invasion and Motown's polished style dominated the airwaves, overshadowing many of the blues-oriented artists who had previously found success. Etta's recordings, no matter how brilliantly executed, faced an uphill battle for airtime. Then in 1967, she experienced a creative rebirth at the famed Muscle Shoals Studios in Alabama, working with producer Rick Hall. Muscle Shoals was the epicenter of a gritty, soul-drenched style that helped define artists like Aretha Franklin, Wilson Pickett, and Otis Redding. Etta fit right into this environment. As she collaborated with the famed Muscle Shoals rhythm section, she channeled her heartbreak and rage into songs like Tell Mama and I'd Rather Go Blind. These tracks again connected with R&B audiences, reminding the industry that Etta James was a singer of formidable depth. Yet commercial triumphs did not solve Etta's underlying struggles. By the early 1970s, she was once again off the charts, locked in a losing battle with heroin that pushed her into petty crimes simply to maintain her habit. In 1973, by court order, she entered rehab, an experience that simultaneously attempted to save her life, but also underscored how far she had fallen. That same year, she recorded an album called Only a Fool, a rock-oriented project produced by Gabriel Meckler. Although it did not set the charts ablaze, it displayed her versatility, crossing genre lines and proving that her powerful voice could adapt to nearly any style. Nevertheless, her personal life remained unsteady. Even when she found short periods of sobriety, old temptations lurked around the corner. Throughout most of the 1970s, Etta kept her career afloat by performing in clubs and at occasional blues festivals. Chess Records gave her intermittent opportunities to record, but the albums received modest promotion. Critics, however, frequently praised her output, calling attention to her still dazzling vocal ability. In 1978, a pivotal moment arrived when her longtime fans, the Rolling Stones, invited her to open shows for them on tour. The Stones had been open in their admiration of American blues and R&B since their inception, often citing artists like Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, and Etta James as foundational inspirations. This collaboration put her back on larger stages, reintroducing her to audiences who may have lost track of her after her initial success. The following year, she signed with Warner Brothers and recorded Deep in the Night, produced by the legendary Jerry Wexler. Though sales were again lukewarm, critics took note, praising the album's mixture of rock, blues, and soul elements. Etta James still had fire in her voice, no question about it, but the old cycles repeated themselves. During the early 1980s, Etta once again fell into drug dependence, influenced by a partner who shared the same destructive habit. She saw her bookings diminish and her public profile shrank. Yet even in her darkest moments, she never completely turned her back on music. She kept performing smaller gigs whenever she could, sometimes for meager pay, sometimes just to hold on to the lifeline that music represented. By 1988, she found the strength to enter the Betty Ford Center, one of the nation's most prominent rehab facilities. She completed treatment successfully, determined this time to sustain her recovery. That same year, she signed with Island Records and released 7-Year Itch, produced by Muscle Shoals veteran Barry Beckett. Critics hailed the record as a potent comeback, and audiences welcomed her return. Etta once again committed herself to consistent touring and recording, following up with Sticking to My Guns in 1990 and The Right Time in 1992. The energy and conviction in these records were not that of a fading star, but of a survivor who had lived several lifetimes worth of conflict and come through to sing about it. Her perseverance paid off in 1993 when she was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The following year, she signed with Private Music, a label that gave her the freedom to explore jazz standards, especially those associated with her longtime idol, Billie Holiday. The resulting album, Mystery Lady Songs of Billie Holiday, was both a commercial and critical triumph. It earned Etta her first Grammy Award in 1995, an emotional milestone that many felt was long overdue. The album highlighted Etta's adaptability. She shifted from belting R&B to embracing delicate phrasing reminiscent of jazz vocalists, all without losing that distinct spark that had always defined her singing. She kept recording with Private Music until 2003, releasing a string of albums that showcased her reverence for different genres, from blues and jazz to rock-inflected numbers. During the same period, her live shows became hot tickets for those who wanted to witness a legend who had weathered the storms of addiction, heartbreak, and industry change, yet still possessed a voice that could raise goosebumps. In 2003, Etta published her autobiography, Rage to Survive, The Etta James Story. The title said it all, an unflinching look at her fierce determination to keep going no matter what. The book offered raw insights into her childhood, Her mother's complicated role in her life, her father's absence, and the swirl of chaos that often surrounded her. Critics praised its candor and humor, noting that it captured the same unvarnished honesty Etta poured into her music. In 2008, her legacy reached new audiences when pop star Beyoncé Knowles portrayed her in the film Cadillac Records, a dramatized account of Chess Records' heyday. While the movie took liberties with the historical timeline, it introduced Etta's story and, by extension, her vast catalog of recorded music to a younger generation. That same year, Etta offered her own critique, at times expressing disapproval of certain portrayals in the film and controversies regarding Beyoncé's performance of At Last at the inaugural ball for President Barack Obama. Nevertheless, the renewed spotlight confirmed how large Etta James loomed in the pantheon of American music. In her personal life, Etta was married to Artis Mills from 1969 until her death in 2012, and she had two sons, Donto and Sameto, fathered by different men. While Etta guarded certain details of her private sphere, she often spoke with brutal frankness about the pain and joy that shaped her. By the late 2000s, she faced renewed health challenges. In 2010, she was hospitalized for MRSA-related infections. Around this time, it emerged that she had been treated for painkiller dependency and had also been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Despite these hardships, her love for music never faded. In 2011, she released what she announced would be her final studio album, The Dreamer, on Verve Forecast. Though her health was declining, critics still detected flashes of that raw passion in her voice, and the album served as a poignant bookend to an extraordinary career. Unfortunately, her condition worsened. Later in 2011, she was diagnosed with terminal leukemia. Etta James passed away on January 20th, 2012, in Riverside, California, just 5 days shy of her 74th birthday. Her death reverberated through the music community. Tributes poured in from fellow artists, fans, and critics alike, each citing her immense influence and the emotional depth of her recordings. She was laid to rest in Inglewood Park Cemetery in Los Angeles County, California. The news of her passing felt like the end of an era, but her records continued to speak for her, blistering testimonies of heartbreak, faith, and a refusal to be silenced by life's challenges. To understand why Etta James's story remains so profoundly resonant, it's helpful to consider the historical tapestry of the eras she lived through. Born in 1938, she was a child during the final years of the Great Depression and World War II. She came of age in the post-war prosperity of the late 1940s, 1940s, and early 1950s, a time when the United States was still rigidly segregated, yet Black American music was quietly revolutionizing the cultural mainstream. R&B's rise collided with rock and roll's birth, forging the soundtrack of a generation that would reshape social norms around race and youth culture. Etta was at the forefront of that shift, singing from her gut about desire, betrayal, and longing. She sang in juke joints that were once deemed borderline illicit, then rose to national prominence on segregated stages, facing many of the same challenges as her contemporaries like Little Richard, Ray Charles, and Fats Domino. But where some artists were more guarded, Etta could be brash, witty, and even combative. She spoke openly about how it felt to see her music overshadowed by sanitized cover versions, a practice that robbed countless Black artists of rightful income and recognition. She didn't mince words about her label disputes or personal feuds. This candor endeared her to some while alienating others, but it always commanded attention. No matter what personal trouble she faced, a jail sentence, forced rehab, or an abusive partner, She channeled that pain into performances that left audiences both exhilarated and emotionally spent. The scope of her influence became clearer as the decades passed. Janis Joplin cited Etta as a massive inspiration. Diana Ross, who famously portrayed Billie Holiday in Lady Sings the Blues, also paid attention to Etta's artistry, especially how she bridged the gap between raw gospel-infused R&B and the more refined edges of jazz balladry. Later generations of singers, from Adele to Christina Aguilera to the late Amy Winehouse, would praise Etta's emotional directness and unfiltered approach to storytelling through song. Even beyond the R&B and rock realms, in corners of pop, country, and alternative music, there are whispers of Etta's influence in how artists approach a vocal performance with fearless vulnerability. Despite this far-reaching impact, Etta's journey was never smooth. The generational trauma she carried, combined with a self-destructive streak, meant that any period of calm or success was often followed by chaos. Her mother's absence during her youth cast a long shadow, as did her yearning for a father figure. While her grandparents and foster homes provided some stability, the pain of feeling rootless informed her dynamic stage presence, a sense that she was always singing for survival. Each of her early hits, from The Wallflower to Good Rockin' Daddy, contained echoes of a rebellion she couldn't fully articulate in her teenage years, but as she matured, she found the words, the melodies, and eventually the mainstream platforms to express them. One poignant detail sometimes overlooked is the ambiguous search for her father's identity. Etta's suspicion that Minnesota Fats was her biological father brought a dash of folklore to her life story. Minnesota Fats, born Rudolph Wanderone, was a larger-than-life figure, a hustler known for his outrageous persona and pool hall wizardry. While Etta never obtained conclusive proof, the connection between two flamboyant personalities suggests an almost mythic twist. Whether or not they were actually related, the speculation itself contributed to the aura of mystery surrounding her. For a child already steeped in unconventional circumstances, imagining that one's father was a legendary gambler might have offered a bizarre form of comfort or excitement. Later in life, Etta's mention of this belief showed that she had come to embrace the swirling legends that encircled her existence, no matter how improbable. Her time at Chess Records was a pivotal chapter, not only for her artistic evolution, but for the larger narrative of American music. Leonard Chess had a knack for spotting and cultivating black talent, though stories abound of artists fighting for fair treatment and royalties. Etta was no exception. She enjoyed creative freedom to a degree, which allowed her to record orchestrated ballads like her signature, At Last, a song not mentioned in the original text but integral to her mainstream breakthrough. Recorded in 1960, At Last transcended the boundaries between R&B and pop, becoming a timeless romantic anthem. Its success also helped Etta access more upscale venues, bridging a gap that separated the blues clubs from the swankier supper clubs where white audiences gathered. Although the original text does not discuss At Last, it remains one of her definitive songs, and it's impossible to imagine her story without it. The ballad's universal appeal soared over the decades, becoming a staple at weddings and a repeated presence in film soundtracks. Yet, no matter how revered she became for At Last, the rawness of her deeper cuts, such as I'd Rather Go Blind, illuminated the pathos and suffering beneath the glossy veneer. When she belted lines about heartbreak, one sensed the intensity of lived experience, not just interpretive skill. This emotional candor likely explains the devotion of her fans. She made them feel each lyric as something personal, Even in her final years, when her voice had lost some of its earlier elasticity, she delivered each note with a lifetime's worth of soul. Throughout her later life, Etta remained an irrepressible force. Collaborations with more contemporary producers, such as Barry Beckett, brought her renewed relevance. Her induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1993 was more than just a symbolic accolade. It represented a partial redress of the earlier decades of neglect, condescension, and exploitation that she, like so many other pioneering black artists, had endured. She was also inducted into the Blues Hall of Fame, among other honors. Each recognition highlighted a different facet of her contribution. The boundary-pushing R&B upstart, the soulful belter of heartbreak anthems, the jazz-influenced chanteuse who breathed new life into Billie Holiday classics. The publication of Rage to Survive allowed Etta to reclaim her narrative, to speak openly about the years of addiction and turmoil. The autobiography is laced with her characteristic wit and candor, revealing the woman behind the show-stopping voice. She refused to whitewash her story or shy away from naming the individuals and circumstances that shaped her. In a sense, the book performed the same function for her personal life that her music did for her artistry. It laid bare the truth, unvarnished and unapologetic, demanding that listeners or readers meet her on her own terms. Her portrayal by Beyonce Knowles in Cadillac Records introduced Etta to a demographic that might otherwise have discovered her music only via At Last in commercials or film trailers. The casting was a testament to her enduring legend, even though the film took creative liberties in condensing real events. Etta's critique of Beyoncé's usage of At Last at President Barack Obama's inaugural ball generated considerable media chatter. Some painted Etta's reaction as mean-spirited, but others saw it as a sign of her protectiveness over her signature tune, an anthem she had lived and performed for decades before it became a staple for younger generations to reinterpret. In her final phase, Etta's health complications echoed the trials she had faced all her life. Alzheimer's disease, leukemia, and the lingering physical toll of her earlier lifestyle made day-to-day existence challenging. Nonetheless, she summoned the energy to release The Dreamer in 2011, ensuring that her farewell to the recording studio was on her own terms. Even as terminal leukemia advanced, she held firm to the identity she had forged for herself, a survivor who would keep singing and speaking her mind until she had nothing left to give. She died on January 20th, 2012. Within hours of the news, social media lit up with tributes reflecting how her life's work had touched multiple generations. Musicians from every genre, rock, soul, gospel, jazz, country, spoke of her as a guiding light. Critics circulated quotes praising her as one of the most riveting soul singers in American history. Longtime fans shared personal stories of hearing Etta in a tiny club or dancing to her records at a wedding. The cultural outpouring underscored the magnitude of her loss, but also celebrated the fullness of her life. Etta's burial at Inglewood Park Cemetery felt symbolic. Located not far from the sites that nurtured her early career, she remained in Los Angeles County, close to the roots that formed her artistic identity. Looking back, Etta James's legacy can be understood as a tapestry woven from a range of musical traditions: church gospel, Mississippi Delta blues, classic jazz vocal stylings, and the rebellious spirit of early rock and roll. Her voice was the unifying thread, capable of conjuring delicate longing or unleashing an almost primal wail. She refused to adhere to a single genre, preferring to let her emotion guide her artistry. Every era she lived through left a distinct imprint on her style, from the doo-wop harmonies of her teenage years to the gritty southern soul of Muscle Shoals, and from the orchestrated ballads for chess to the rock-inflected experiments later on. Beyond the music, her story is a testament to human resilience and the complexity of forgiveness, both self-forgiveness and that of others. She often recounted how she had to forgive her mother for a turbulent childhood, how she had to come to terms with her father's absence, how she learned to walk away from abusive relationships, and how she battled her demons again and again. That capacity for endurance manifested itself each time she launched a comeback, stepped on stage in a new city, or poured out her heart in a recording booth. The audience felt it, responded to it, and it transcended the typical boundaries of celebrity worship to become a genuine bond. In analyzing her place in music history, scholars have often noted that Etta bridged the gap between earlier blues divas like Bessie Smith and contemporary R&B powerhouses. Her mid-century rise came at a crucial time when American popular music was in flux, and she shaped that metamorphosis. As she aged, she also paved the way for older female vocalists to remain relevant, proving that longevity in show business was possible without compromising artistic identity. She was rebellious enough to eschew the squeaky clean ideals that were sometimes imposed on female artists, and sincere enough to let her audience see her flaws. That duality is what made her both iconic and relatable. Her struggles with addiction reflect the broader narrative of many performers in mid-20th century America, especially African Americans confronted with systemic barriers, personal hardships, and the rigors of endless travel on the Chitlin circuit. While some found stable ground or mainstream acclaim, others succumbed to the weight of those challenges. Etta floated somewhere in the middle for much of her life, swinging from triumph to disaster and back again, until her later years when she seemed to enjoy a more stable career. Even then, she was never entirely free from her personal battles, which she admitted could flare up under the right pressures. Listening to her recordings, one feels the tension between heartbreak and redemption. The timbre of her voice often conveyed both defiance and vulnerability. Whether performing a rowdy up-tempo track or a sweeping ballad, she brought the same passionate fervor. It's this authentic emotional complexity that continues to resonate. Generations who discover Etta through streaming platforms or tribute concerts realize she was never just an oldies act. She was a living embodiment of soul in its truest sense. Her hallmark performance style, intimate, searing, and wholly immersive, influenced how later artists approached live shows. She turned each stage into a personal confessional, not just singing notes, but telling stories with her entire body. The legacy of that approach can be spotted in countless contemporary acts, where singers break the fourth wall to connect with fans on a profound level. Etta did it first, and did it arguably with the most raw honesty. She knew what it meant to live the blues, not just sing it. And that knowledge poured forth every time she opened her mouth to let the music flow. From a modern standpoint, it's intriguing to note that Etta James's discography has only continued to expand in reach since her passing, aided by digital platforms and renewed interest in classic soul and R&B. She is not relegated to a mere footnote in music history, but stands as a titan whose vocal style shaped the future of popular singing. Contemporary tributes, whether they be covers of I'd Rather Go Blind or At Last, often serve as the gateway for new fans to immerse themselves in her deeper catalog, unveiling hidden gems from her chess years or her soulful explorations at Muscle Shoals. Although she spent her life contending with a variety of hardships, including near-constant financial struggles, her ultimate legacy reflects an abundance of cultural wealth. Awards and honors now decorate her name, multiple Grammy wins, including a Lifetime Achievement Award, recognition by the Blues Foundation, and tributes from musical luminaries across the spectrum. She also posthumously received further accolades, underscoring the sense that the world took a while to fully catch up to her genius. But Etta herself never seemed to doubt her calling. She may have experienced despair, but her artistry never wavered. She sang as if each performance could be her last, capturing that ephemeral spirit that defines the best of American music. The story of Etta James, her rise, her repeated falls, her furious returns, is emblematic of a broader narrative about passion, identity, and the pursuit of creative expression in the face of adversity. Her mother's youth, her absent father, the instability of her childhood, the ephemeral nature of early successes, the betrayals by the music industry, the complexities of her romantic entanglements, and her decades-long struggle with heroin all contributed to the tapestry from which she drew. For Etta, every heartbreak and every moment of joy fed into her artistry, forging a sound that was both steeped in tradition and wholly original. That she lived to the age of 73, despite all the obstacles, is a testament to her formidable willpower. Her final years, though fraught with health challenges, included glimpses of triumph, a cameo in mainstream pop culture, new albums that stayed true to her signature style, and the fulfillment of seeing younger artists publicly acknowledge her impact. Even after receiving the Alzheimer's diagnosis, she pressed on to record The Dreamer, telling the press that while her body might slow down, her spirit was relentless. That unwavering commitment to the craft is perhaps the greatest lesson Etta James imparted. She showed that no matter how often life knocks a person down, there can be redemption in the music itself, in the act of telling one's story through melody and emotion. Her funeral was a ceremony that reflected her status as a legend. Various musicians paid tribute through song, and many eulogies spoke of her toughness, her humor, and her generosity. Some recounted stories of her early days on the road. Others focused on her later reemergences, and all celebrated the fact that she had refused to let the darkness consume her voice. This final farewell in Los Angeles County, near her birthplace, affirmed that Etta had come full circle. She began as a wayward girl with a gift so big it could scarcely be contained, and she ended as a woman whose voice had galvanized music lovers across the globe, from the back rooms of dingy clubs to the stage of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. In reflecting on her story, one cannot overlook the changes in American culture that occurred during her lifetime. She witnessed and influenced the civil rights movement, as songs by Black artists increasingly penetrated mainstream charts in the 1950s and 1960s. She navigated the volatile transitions between doo-wop, early rock and roll, disco, funk, and the corporate pop of the 1980s and 1990s. Through each phase, Etta adapted, but never lost herself. Even when producers tried to mold her into a certain sound, her authenticity shone through. Her unpredictability, both personally and artistically, kept her fans on edge. She was capable of heartbreakingly tender moments, but could turn fierce and unyielding when she felt disrespected or misunderstood. That fire, which burned as brilliantly as her voice, came to define her. It is revealing, too, to consider the role of the church in her development. As a child soloist in the Baptist choir, she first learned to project with passion and conviction. Later, in the nightclubs and recording studios, that foundation became intertwined with secular themes of love, desire, and betrayal, resulting in a layered expression that transcended the usual boundaries of gospel, blues, or R&B. Even her jazz-tinged works carried echoes of that church fervor, glimpses of the spiritual battles waged internally by a singer who had grown up in the pews. Listeners often found themselves moved because behind the ache and grit, there was a sense of searching that was as deeply spiritual as it was emotional. As the digital age encourages a reevaluation of musical icons, Etta James stands near the top of the pantheon. Her discography is continually rediscovered on streaming platforms, praised by critics, and covered by new voices seeking to tap into the wellspring of emotion she embodied. In that sense, her legacy is not locked in the past. It continues to evolve. Young audiences hearing At Last for the first time might detect the timeless quality in her phrasing, or those who stumble upon I'd Rather Go Blind might marvel at how thoroughly she captured the desperation of heartbreak. These newfound admirers join generations of longtime Etta fans, forging a continuum of appreciation that shows no sign of fading. If the question is why her story elicits such a strong emotional response, the simplest answer may be that Etta James sang exactly as she lived, fearlessly, without apology, and with a heart laid bare. Whether one focuses on her earliest days in Los Angeles, her teenage escapades in San Francisco, her triumphant hits and ignominious setbacks, or her final years confronting mortality, the underlying theme remains the same. She was a force propelled by a calling. Singing was not just a job, but a compulsion, a destiny that neither adversity nor addiction could extinguish. Her relationship with the audience was symbiotic. She gave them the raw truth in musical form, and they in return offered her the adoration, respect, and resources to sustain that truth. Even in times when the industry machine or personal failings threatened to derail her, she clung to that exchange. Perhaps that's why she became such an icon. She embodied the idea that music can be both an escape and a confrontation, an art form that dares to wrestle with life's darkness in pursuit of an unshakable light. By the time Etta James closed her eyes for the last time, she had lived multiple lifetimes' worth of experiences. She had performed for adoring fans and faced the judgment of the courts. She had tasted the sweet intoxication of stardom and the bitter dregs of poverty. She had influenced and been influenced by the greatest names in the business, from Johnny Otis to the Rolling Stones, from Leonard Chess to Jerry Wexler, and from Billie Holiday's legacy all the way to contemporary pop icons like Beyoncé. Through it all, her voice remained an unerring constant, a blend of nuance and brute force that, at its best, could stop listeners in their tracks. Her funeral was not the end of her resonance. In the aftermath, tributes multiplied, from reissues of her classic albums to heartfelt testimonials by musicians who'd grown up idolizing her. Documentaries and radio specials attempted to capture her essence, some focusing on the big hits, others delving into the lesser-known corners of her discography. Fans old and new continued to celebrate the idea that Etta James was more than just a singer. She was a testament to survival. To be sure, many artists have survived harsh realities, but few have worn their hearts so openly while producing a body of work that thrums with such urgency. At Inglewood Park Cemetery, her headstone stands as a reminder that behind the legend was a human being with pains, flaws, and longings. Many visitors dropped by to pay respects, some leaving notes about how her music changed their lives, how her story gave them hope, or how her unwavering spirit helped them believe in their own. Such gestures illustrate the depth of her impact. She may have passed away, but the emotional link she forged remains. Her recordings are the inheritance she left for anyone willing to listen and be moved. Even years after her death, Etta James's name is spoken with a certain reverence across musical circles. In classes on American culture, students examine her role in bridging racial and genre barriers. In discussions about feminist icons, Some hold her up as an example of a woman who refused to be tamed by an industry still learning how to handle powerful female talent. In medical or psychological contexts, her struggles with addiction and subsequent stints in rehab highlight the complexities faced by those who operate in high-pressure, entertainment-driven environments. At every turn, Etta's story offers lessons, both cautionary and inspiring, on how to navigate life's extremes. One can only imagine what else she might have accomplished had circumstances been kinder or had she avoided the traps of addiction. Yet to dwell on hypotheticals is to misunderstand the essence of Etta James. Part of what made her artistry so vital was the rawness that came from living on the edge. She channeled her anger, her desire, her heartbreak, and her fleeting triumphs into songs that remain potent. As a result, she stands alongside the greats, Billie Holiday, Aretha Franklin, Mahalia Jackson, Tina Turner, whose voices transcend boundaries of time and place. Each time At Last is played at a wedding, or Tell Mama ignites a dance floor, or I'd Rather Go Blind resonates with someone nursing a broken heart, Etta's legacy continues to grow. The anguish and joy she captured so brilliantly live on, conjured anew each time a record spins or a digital track streams. In sum, Etta James's life remains a testament to the volatile mix of pain, grace, talent, and determination that shaped American music in the 20th century. Her mother's youth, her uncertain parentage, her early forays into the church choir, her adolescent run-ins with the law, her precarious dance between stardom and the fringes of society, all these elements intertwined to create an artist who sang with unparalleled soul. Her brilliance was matched only by her resilience, as she rebounded from personal and professional crises repeatedly, returning with a voice that seemed only to grow richer from the adversity. She leaves behind a recorded legacy that ensures her presence will never fade, accompanied by the lessons of her tumultuous life, a life that ended not in anonymity, but amid an outpouring of admiration from fans who saw her not just as a singer, but as a survivor of the highest order. And in that sense, Etta James will forever be the unbreakable soul who dared to transform her struggles into songs that, to this day, set hearts alight whenever they are played.